Hello, and welcome back to our next segment reading of the Asatru Edda. I am Asgard Skegg, and today's chapter is actually a milestone chapter because we are now halfway through, exactly at the halfway point of the Asatru Edda. And today's chapter, there's actually there's symbology to the story that we're reading today and its connections with Ragnarok because today's chapter is entitled Fimbulvetr 1. And what the Fimbulvetr is the very first time when the influences of the Jotnar were so heavy and so strong that it literally shrouded all of Midgard in this prolonged winter. Fimbulvetr in the old tongue closely relates to a winter. So, we're going to go ahead and dive right into this milestone chapter, which is Fimbulvetr. After the arrival of Ivaldi's sons in Jotunheimr, the first Fimbulvetr began. The second comes right before the destruction of the worlds. There were 3 times 3 winters, with great battles taking place throughout the world. Far behind the outermost district of Jotunheimr, in the remotest north, near the edge of the Earth disk, and by Amsvatnir Sea, over which eternal darkness broods, lies a land in which the Ivaldi sons directed their course. Its dales stretch between the glacier-covered mountains that are overgrown with trees of the sort that drive in the darkness and cold of the renowned Jarnvidr. Black precipices gape down into unknown depths. In one of them is a ravine that leads down into Niflheimr in Jormungand. Here, in a passage of the Dales, which are called Ufdalir, Volander and his brothers set up their dwelling and smithy in the house called Brunakr, in Thrymheimr, by the water called Ufsair. Here they could safeguard themselves against any pursuit, and what they were doing could not be seen from Asgarder's lookout tower, Hivsgulf. Volander had 2 reasons for staying in this inhospitable land. He was as proficient as Golvig, and even more so than she, in all of the secrets of the Seder, and was lord over all of its powers, even though he had no desire to use them up until then. He and his brothers had been taught by Mimir how to control weather to keep the darkness and mist of Niflheimr from entering the southern regions of Jormungand, and as such were the ones who conquered the clouds rising, storm foreboding from the abyss. Now Volander would use these powers to send frost and storms over the worlds and make Midgard uninhabitable. This was his first intention. His second was to forge a sword in which he would place all of his skill, an irresistible sword that would bring the hammer forged by Sindri to shame, kill Thor, and annihilate Asgarder's domain. He became known as Stazi, the arrogant Jotun whose daughter was Skadi. Egil and Sleipnir traveled on skis and hunted the wild animals they were capable of living in the regions of the worlds. Volander worked all day with his cedar tools and his forge. When strikes of the hammer from the smithy did not echo against the gloomy passages of the dales, there was heard the sound of Volander's chanting, a strange, somewhat dismal song that filled the hearts of the wild animals with agony, while frosty nights, worse than any other, made them tremble under their furs from the cold. Then Volander stood on a cliff with his face directed to the south, and he shook a cloth similar to a sail, or he scattered ashes into the air or performed other feats. And then the air darkened in front of him with frosty mists that condensed into a giant cloud and drifted out over Jotunheimer and the Elivagar to Midgard, over whose fields it unloaded snowstorms, hailstorms, and devastating whirlwinds. Then hard gusts from the White Mountain Range teased apart and wove together the storm-happy daughters of Aegir Grimr, bred on frost. His song penetrated down into Niflheimer in Jormungand and gripped the 9 Jotun maids who turned Grotai and the starry heaven with delirium. 2 strong Thurs maids, Finja and Mensha, had joined them and set the mill at a furious pace so that all the depths of the earth trembled. Rock fragments soared from the millstone, which were cast high up from the sea. The earth's mountains spit fire and smoke, and raised mechanisms of the mill were shaken, and starry heavens acquired the sloping position it has held ever since. Venja and Menja once sang, "Hard was Hrungnir and his father, yet Sazivolander was stronger than they. Edi Slagfinir and Arnir Egil are our kinsmen, brother of the Bergrisar from whom we are born. Grotai had not come from the grey mountain, nor yet the hard stone from the earth. Nor would the mountain maid be grinding if anyone knew her race. 9 winters we were playmates beneath the earth, our power grew. We maidens constantly performing mighty works. We ourselves moved the Table Mountain from its seat. We rolled the stone over the Jotun's house so that because of it, the earth shook. So we hurled the whirling rock, the heavy stone, so we could make it. Even as the wild horse shakes its mane after he has thrown his rider in the grass, so did the earth shake her forests and mountains. Streams spread over the fields. The sea seethed. Mountains spewed towards the clouds, and what they spewed, the clouds flung back upon the earth. First, the earth slanted northwards and sank down lower and lower. Then the low marks of Midgard were buried under the sea. Forests were heaved up and played in the winds. The years after frost came and lay the land under a white blanket of snow, followed by storm winds rising out of the north with moving mountains of ice and stones. Every year, Midgard yielded fewer crops. Bad harvest followed bad harvest. Vatir of hunger and disease came with the blizzards and laid waste to man and beast. Svithjod fell under the control of a Jotun named Snare, and he had the daughter Mjol, who flies swiftly through the air. Fornjotr had the son Kari, whose son is Jokul, and he is the father of Snare. Snare's children are Thori, Fon, Drifa, and Mjor. Fornjoto's ugly sons began first to send snow. Under Snare's reign, the harvest was ruined by the severely bad weather, and the foodstuffs began to run short. Then the populace was painfully tormented by famine. Whether it is because the ground had insufficient rainfall or had been baked too hard, the sea lay dormant, and the fields bore only sparse crops. The region, starved of food, was worn down by the weary famine, nor was there any help available to make the provisions adequate and stave off hunger. Volundar's song penetrated like heavy wing beats all the way up to Asgard and filled his region with dread. The sun chariots and the time-measuring moonbeams had difficulty making their way through the mist-filled depths down onto the earth. Sparsely, one day passed over the course of many years when Volundar was not alternating between the work in his smithy and moments of singing his dreadful song. It penetrated through the earth and turned its waters into waste. Year after year, the fields of Midgard sprouted shorter straw and thinner ears of corn, and that which was left to harvest was ravaged ever so often by the frosty nights. The humans sacrificed in vain to the Godin and began to question their power. Through the reduction of the liquids in the Ur's and Mimir's holy wells during these years, Yggdrasil's northern branches were all the more barren of buds and leaves. With Freyr and Freyja in the possession of the Jotnar, with Groa dead and Idun missing from Asgard, the powers of growth were weakened to the point where they could not defend the worlds from the Fimbulvetr. One morning, Ivaldi's sons found by the shore 3 women sitting and spinning flax. By them lay their swan guises, for they were Svanmejar. These were Idun, who had joined her sisters on the strand, Auda, another daughter of Ivaldi, and Sif, and daughter of Sigdigar. When Loki lured Idun out of Asgard and was taken by Volundar, she happily joined her brothers, whom she had longed after, especially Volundar, whom she had loved since childhood. She was already in the Ufdalir when her sisters arrived. When Sif came to Ufdalir, she carried a message to Egil that she could not come. He would later discover that she had died. The brothers took them home with them. Egil had Sif, Slagfinur Adona, and Volundar Idun. The 3 maids flew from the south through Myrkvidar Janvidar. Young Svanmejar filled their olog. One of them pressed Egil into their white embrace. The second was Altha. She laid her head on Slagfinur's breast, but the third, their sister, laid her arms around Volundar's white neck. Then the Ivaldi sons wore the Svanhingrar. In this way, these Svanmejar, who adorned Midgarder's meadows with flowers, were now missing from Asgard. The hearts of these Disir were transformed, and now they desire victory for the Ivaldi sons, the destruction of Midgard and Asgard's ruin. These Disir dwelt in Ufdalir, descended from the upper branches of Yggdrasil. They suffered as the snow fell, confined as they were in the cold lands of Niflheimer, for they were used to better abodes back home and disliked being shrouded in night. They were grieved in Uftalir, having exchanged their swan guises for wolf skins to keep warm. They changed their dispositions, delightment in guile, and shifted their shapes. Thus became Milkgrithur. Loki offered his services as a milkmaid to Volundar and joined him and his brothers as they began their work against the Godin. Loki would often return to Asgard whenever it suited his malevolent purposes. Volundar's smithy was now a workplace of magical instruments. There hung a long rope of twined bast with which knots were made at even distances. In every one of them a storm wind was bound. For every week that passed, he untied a knot and released the bound wind and sent with it his song to the south, saturated with the snow, clouds, and hail. In this manner, he endured the weeks he spent in Uftalir, and he figured that when all the knots of the rope were untied, Midgard would be transformed into an ice-covered desert devoid of humans. Volander had forged an arm ring out of gold, similar to the ring Dropnir, which was forged by Sindri in the respect that other rings, although not as many, dropped from it. The ring is called Andvaranta, and it can multiply wealth for the one who holds it. The ring, finished 90 days after Volander's arrival in Uftalir, drops 2 more rings every 9 nights. This armlet is of amazing weight. It is a lindbogi and will turn into an ormer and fall with poisoned tips on its fangs upon the man who pulls on it and is not supposed to have it. It and the rings it drops are magical instruments and have the shapes of serpents. Volander worked daily on the Sword of Revenge. The sword was called Gambanteinn, and Volander applied all of his artistry, all of his secret knowledge to its preparation. He tempered the blade in the poisonous waves of the rivers in Niflhel and etched runar of certain victory into its invincible steel. He hammered vengeance and hate, woe and misfortune into its grain, sharpened the poisonous edge as sharp as Vafarlogr, cleaned its surface with the radiance of the sun, and wristed evil runar onto it. The sword had been forged so that it would grant unconditional victory to Volander or one of his relatives, but ruin for anyone else who availed himself of it. The sword is rich in victory and is a good and excellent work of the wonderful smith, fitted with a golden hilt. It was engraved all over and shown how war first came into the world and the flood that destroyed the At of the Himthrisar. In pure gold inlay on the sword guards, there were rune markings correctly in size, stating and recording for whom the sword had been first made, and ornamented with its scroll-worked hilt. The slender sign-marked sword fights of itself against the Jotun race if it is a wise man who owns it. The sword can assume the form of a tusk of a rare beast. Its ends ended with gold. This sword, hardened in the blood and venom of Ormr, burns like a pyre when one fares through the dark forest. The smith covered its destructiveness with eye-captivating beauty, and nevertheless, it seemed to never be finished. Every day, Volander found something new to do to it. Thank you for joining us on this next segment reading of the Asatru Edda. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please support the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and subscribe to catch all of our new content. Thank you again for listening in. We'll see you on the next segment.